My name is Ksenia Coulter, and I'm a developer at the Washington Post. And I'm here today to talk to you about getting the most out of your code review process. So, raising some hands, let's see who here never deployed broken code to production.
Never.
Ah, yeah. I don't believe you. Who here already has and follows a code review process? Most people. We'll define it through the talk, yes. Who here thinks their code doesn't need a review? Put your hands down. Actually, this talk is for you. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for the warm welcome, Ottawa. Really enjoyed it. But really, I met some great people, so thank you. So why code reviews, right? People say, always code as if the guy who ends up maintaining your code is a violent psychopath. I don't agree with that. I say, always code as if the person who's going to end up maintaining your code is you. Because honestly, in most situations, it's going to be you. And how many times have you gone, oh, who wrote this? Get blame. Oh, no, it's me. What did I do? So this is going to help a little bit with that problem. So why code reviews? Fewer bugs. Yay, everyone's happier. Note that is not a replacement for a legit QA process. Reducing technical debt. So leave the code better than you found it, and don't introduce new bugs or new complexity. This one is an important one for me, knowledge transfer between team members. Both the reviewer and the reviewee can learn from a code review. And yes, that does include the senior devs. Everybody makes mistakes. You know, a junior can catch typos and missing semicolons as much as a senior developer. And for me, I work with clients, and that makes for happier clients. So how do we get the team buy-in? You know, if you have a team and they don't want to do agile, they don't want to do code reviews, they think that everything is fine, the first and most important part is to get the team buy-in. So you may see something like this, but I've always pushed to master. Our current process is fine. It's going to take too much time. Nightmare. So how do we get this buy-in? Allow the time to streamline the process. If you are the team lead or manager, understand that it might actually take longer to produce and push out new features when you introduce new processes. That doesn't mean that the code review process is not working. Automate as much as possible. So use linters, use code, use testing, because you don't want to have a back and forth on style. Do we use tabs or spaces? We want to decide that first as a team and relegate that to the computer and not people, so people can focus on more interesting things in their code reviews. Establish standards as a team, and this is a big one. When you have a team that's resistant to process, you want to bring everyone to the table so everyone owns a part of it. Everybody should contribute to the code standards of your team. Everybody should have an input and say, hey, I think our style guide should be this way. And build a culture of trust. Easy, right? Well, hopefully, you already have a team of people who trust each other and can give and receive honest feedback. While many things contribute to team culture, there are always a few things your team can implement in order to make code reviews less intimidating. So this is just a sample of our code values. We got together as a team and had a big brainstorm session with sticky notes and all that fun stuff. And this is something we came up together. This doesn't have to be the same for your team. this is very much about adjusting this to what works for you as a team. So let's jump into some details now. What do we actually look for when we are the reviewer? So let's start with the computer science's hardest problem, naming things. So try not to use generic names like item, element, unit. If what you're working with is a photo or a music file, don't call it item. You will have no idea what's going on. Don't invent terminology. I work in media, and there's already a set terminology for that field. I'm sure many of you who work in finance or medicine know this problem really well. So if you're new to the industry and new to the team, maybe first you want to create a glossary or look up some terms so you don't end up reinventing the wheel. And of course, Semantic HTML. So let's look at this example. This function is called icon events. I have no idea from that name what events are going to happen to the icon, right? And what is this toggle class show mobile? What is it actually going to show? Is it going to show a picture of a mobile phone? What's going on? That's not the best name for this. Here we have init drawer. To me, what would make more sense is open menu, right? What does it mean to initiate something? This is not really initiating it, it's opening it. And this name here, guts, that is not the proper term for whatever it is. So maybe rethink that. Now comments. So for comments, general rule is to write why, not how. You want to assume that the people on your team, when they read your code, they can tell what it's doing, but maybe they don't know why. Always write the business rules, right? Especially if you're writing something that might not be best practices. You can say, hey, yes, I am adding a fourth analytics script onto this because the client wants it for X, Y, and Z reasons. Don't remove this. Yes, I really do want it there. However, if you find yourself writing too many comments, you might want to step back and think, does my code actually make sense? And is there a way to make it simpler? And of course, keep comments up to date. Hopefully, you don't make any comments that will change next month, tomorrow, but occasionally you should go and look through your comments and make sure they're still up to date. So this comment is pretty clear. It's a warning, do not remove. This is a DAX event. Maybe you would want to add what is a DAX event and why do you want it there. Because maybe in the future, the client no longer wants to use this, so business logic here would make more sense. This one, document.ready, is needed because this script is being included in line and article body. Otherwise, it would run before Bootstrap and Hammer scripts. So in this code base, you don't usually use document.ready, but in this particular case, it's an exception. So it goes a little bit against our style guide. That's why this comment is here explaining why it actually needs to happen. This is an example of a useless comment. Because if you look at the class, it says gallery modal no scroll. So from that class name, you know that the body is not going to be scrolling. So why do you need that comment saying it's preventing body scroll? All right, functions. This is where it gets a little bit dicier. So named functions are the conventionally you want to be able to call the function again and reuse it. However, with ES6, we now have fat arrow functions, which are anonymous. So sometimes maybe there's a use for those, and that's something we have to think about. And again, for your team, it can be different. Maybe you're not using ES6 yet, then that's fine. You can stick with named functions. If you are using ES6, maybe you want to have a conversation of when fat arrow functions, anonymous functions are appropriate. And functions should ideally do one thing and do it well. And they should be reusable. So this is a pretty straightforward function, expand, collapse. You know what it does. It expands and it collapses. This function right here is an anonymous function. And it's only going to be used once, and you can't call it ever again. This right here is an example of a pretty brittle function, because if you look at it, it's using whatever the structure of HTML that you are not sure that's never going to change, right? It has the closest, it's finding siblings, it's looking through, and then toggling the class. You probably don't want to keep this here. This is an example of function that has 148 lines. So probably need to refactor it a little bit and pull out functionality. Now we're getting into something that's harder to say definitively yes or no, right? What is performance? What is maintainability? I like to think of, like, is there already something for that in a code base? And if there is, maybe you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So SASS mixins are really cool because you can reuse that CSS in multiple places. For example, for New Zealand Herald, they had these arrows all over the site for navigation and various bars and galleries. And I created a SASS mixin that took in the radius, and then it spit out the CSS for the arrows. And that is a good example of how you can reuse the same code over and over again. Think about event listeners. Are you listening at the right place? Are you picking up way too much information? Because they can be pretty heavy. Make sure you're actually attaching the event to the element you want to observe, as opposed to like the parent and look at the propagation. Bang importance in your CSS are not great. They can force page relayout. Whenever you're playing with the DOM, those operations can be pretty heavy. So try to batch any sort of DOM updates into as few functions as you can. And the biggest problem with performance on the internet really is image sizes. Image sizes take up majority of what the site's size is. So if you really optimize the images, use SVGs, use resizers where appropriate, have multiple fallbacks for multiple sizes of images. If somebody is opening something on their phone, you don't need to serve a 900 pixel picture. And that's all that you can pay attention to. And of course, you can find more and more examples of that. Security. So if you're writing something that either passes in URL parameters or submits a form or even creates or uses a cookie, you might want to ask a member of your team that is experienced in looking for security vulnerabilities to review your code, because all of that, any sort of user input can be messed with, and you really don't want to open up to that. Again, another thing that we might want to think about is we use NPM, we use all these packages, and sometimes we don't look at, are they still maintained? Are there vulnerabilities that we've been exposed to? Maybe it's not your particular job, but maybe it should be somebody's job to occasionally review that. Some of the other considerations: if your team does automated testing, what is the test coverage? What is the requirement? Did this person actually submit tests? Are they the right tests? Documentation. Do you have any requirement with each ticket to update documentation, especially if it's like new features? Maybe you want to use ES6 now, so look for vars where it could be const, stuff like that. And whatever else your precious snowflake of a team needs to pay attention to. Still with me? We're almost there. OK. Cute puppies are always great. All right, so how do we summarize this? How do we get the most out of code reviews? Give the entire team a say in the process. When you give people agency, it makes it harder for them to avoid doing what you want them to do. Use linters and tests to reinforce code standards. And this is an important one. Write pull requests with knowledge sharing in mind. So maybe you know really well the code base, and you're just like, oh, this is so easy. It's just like 5 lines of code. I don't need to explain this to anyone. But if you have junior members on your team or someone who hasn't worked with this code base, this is an opportunity for you to explain why your approach is good, or like a part of this legacy code base, why something works this way, to newer members to your team. So GitHub allows you to create templates for pull reviews. So when you go to submit a pull request, it automatically has a form. So this is something I've created for one of my projects. All it asks for is the issue, what I did, acceptance criteria, how to test, and maybe screenshots if applicable. A lot of the times when we work with front-end code, somebody can just glance at the screenshot and say, oh, this is actually doesn't line up with the design documents that the client has provided, or something like that. And it gives you sort of a nice way to break it down. You don't have to go like, oh, how do I write this PR? What's the important parts? This just kind of lets you break it down a little bit, and you can create it for your own team with whatever categories you want and works best for you. So another important part is allowing everyone to be the reviewer. So in code reviews, often there's this hierarchical structure where the more senior developers review the juniors' code, and it creates this sort of sometimes unhealthy dynamic of like, I know everything and you just listen to me, and here's all the things you did wrong and I'm going to point out. If you look at code review process as a way for everyone on the team to level up and learn together, you will let junior developers review senior developers' code, because they can see sort of more mature code patterns that they can adopt in their own code. And like I said, anyone can run the code and click around and say, oh, this doesn't actually work, or this edge case over here, or you missed a semicolon there. So it makes the whole team better and stronger if you have both ways, sort of junior developers reviewing code and senior developers reviewing code. And another important part is letting the team negotiate the feedback style. So some people don't care if you just say, looks good to me, pass, or if like, oh, this part doesn't work, this is not going to run, et cetera, et cetera. Like, they don't mind that kind of feedback that's short and brief. But maybe some people want something a little bit more verbose, or maybe they want to receive this feedback one-on-one. Maybe they want to be there to explain their code. Whatever works for your team is what you should do, and definitely allow for individual preferences and variances. So this is something my team came up with, sort of do's and don't guidance. The sandwich method, acknowledge the effort. If you have a good solution, don't hold it back. So sometimes you want to use the Socratic method, like why do you do this? But honestly, if you already have something in mind that works better, just go ahead and give it up, and don't start asking passive-aggressive questions. So that's something we decided on. I think for your team, you should just have this exercise and have your team come up with their own guidance rules for themselves. Note of caution for engineering managers in the room. Sometimes the code review process can be hijacked by bad actors. It has been known to be used as retaliation against other team members. So when somebody's PRs don't get pushed for months and months and their boss is like, you haven't pushed any code to the production in 2 months, what's going on? You're not performing well. Well, sometimes team members just ignore certain team members' pull reviews, or they can be overly critical of one member when they don't really review anyone else. So just be aware that this can be a problem point, and that if somebody is getting their PRs rejected, it's not necessarily that they're writing bad code. And finally, just this is an iterative process. You're gonna find that some of this doesn't work, or you started off with the best intentions and you're like, I want essays in my comments and tell me how great this is, and in reality everyone is writing LGTM thumbs up, you know? Maybe that works for your team, maybe it doesn't. Keep coming back to it once in a while, maybe once in 6 months, once a year, reassess this and come up with better processes that work for your team. That's it for me. This was how to get the most out of code reviews. And if you have any questions, I can take 1 or 2, I think.
You mentioned the sandwich method.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a bit about what that is?
Oh, sure, sorry. So the idea is that criticism is the delicious meat in the middle, and we got this bread of positive reinforcement. So you can say, hey, good job on creating the SASS mixin. However, this right here is actually not the most performant. You use being important or something like that. But overall, this looks good. So that's the sandwich method of criticism. Well, I don't know necessarily what I would change. I really like that you can go into the file and like press the plus button and immediately comment on the specific line. Maybe something where you can select several lines and comment on that as opposed to just one. They've been consistently improving. Recently, they changed sort of the UI. When you create a pull request, usually I would merge it the wrong way, like master to dev instead of dev to master. But now they actually have an arrow of what goes into what. But yeah. So the question is, what about peer programming, and does it substitute code reviews? So I love peer programming. I think it could be really great. You can observe how another person works and pick up their shortcuts and all that, and you do write better code, and there is someone there to say like, oh, you missed a semicolon. But I think when you're working on a piece of code, you can be so zoomed in into this particular problem that it's hard to see the bigger picture, and I do think you still need someone to review the code, even to make sure that like untracked files aren't getting in, or like sometimes you've picked up other commits and you don't want to merge that yet. Just for that sake, honestly.
Approach is fine.
How do you handle multiple code reviewers disagreeing? So some people work on a team of 1 or 2, so obviously like it's harder to find multiple code reviewers. I think whatever works for your team is what you should adopt. There's probably diminishing returns on how many reviewers you have. Probably more than 3 is an overkill. 2 is probably a good number, so you can have diverse opinions. If they disagree, it's probably the engineering manager's role to step in and decide who's right. You can also just have all 3 people in a call together talking about why a certain solution works. And actually, I think it would be a great opportunity for everyone to learn something. If there's a disagreement on a team, it's a good opportunity to see why somebody else thinks differently. I don't want to hold everyone up, so thank you so much. Feel free to ask me more on Twitter.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.